Good morning. My name is Henn Ojaveer. I'm the chair of one of the 7 or 8 science steering groups in ICES. This is my honor and pleasure to introduce the first keynote talk of this year's annual science conference, Professor Mike Elliott. Mike is Emeritus Professor of Estuarine and Coastal Sciences, University of Hull, UK, and he is also currently Director of the private company of International Estuarine and Coastal Specialist. Sorry. He is long-term past Director of former Institute of Estuarine and Coastal Studies, EX, from 1996 to 2017 at Hull University, and also past President of the International Estuarine and Coastal Sciences Association. And he is currently Editor-in-Chief of the journal Estuarine, Coastal and Shelf Science. He has co-authored about 20 books and more than 400 papers, and he has successfully supervised 40 PhD students. Some of the most prominent books include the Estuarine Ecosystem Ecology, Threats and Management, Ecology of Marine Sediments, and Estuarine Ecohydrology and Introduction. He has holds previously or currently holding adjunct professor research positions at Murdoch University in Perth, Klaipėda University here in Lithuania, the University of Palermo, Italy, Xiamen University, China, and the South African Institute of Aquatic Biodiversity. I will list a couple of topics which exemplify his the width of the scientific interests and the complexity of the science topic he is currently working on. So some of those include the effects of hypersaline solutions on the ecophysiology of marine megabenthic organisms, the influence of noise and vibration or marine biota, integrated management of the Humber estuary, the use of computer-aided tomography in determining benthic biodeturbation, shark behavior and energetics, implementation of EU marine directives, pollutant pathways in Brazilian estuaries, ecological and economic valuation in marine systems, and many, many more. If we are lucky today, Mike will show us some of his famous horrendograms, and hopefully will answer some of the "and so what" questions. So please welcome Professor Mike Elliott.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Again, it's difficult to sum up, I guess, all the work we've done, but I've had some great collaborators over the years, and some of them are here, which is delightful. Apologies for my voice. I met Dave Reed at breakfast on Saturday morning, and he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I've got a cold." Thanks, Dave. As Hen, I've known Hen for many years, as Hen mentioned, one of the, I always think there was only 2 questions in our science. One of them is "so what?" and the other one is "what if?" You know, you've done all this wonderful work, and we've done all this wonderful work, so what? What does it mean? How do we use that information? For about 13 years, I worked for the EPA in Scotland, and I was constantly being asked, okay, you've got these data, now so what? And the other question is, what if? Okay, so what? What if this, and this happens? What I want to do is take you through some of the ideas that we've been developing over the years. Some of them, as you'll see that list there, with some very good friends, Roland Cormier in DFO in Canada, Angel Borger in Spain. We've had a series of papers on marine management in general. Alan Whitfield, and I'll show you some of Alan's talk, and then colleagues here like Arturus and Ramunas in Klaipeda and Maciek and so on. And we'll go through some of these ideas. I'll take you through the concept that is mentioned there. Now, I know, and this relates mostly to estuaries, but actually, many of the things I'm going to be discussing are not just on estuaries. So those of you who are not interested in estuaries, I'm hoping there'll be something there for everybody, not least the recent ideas. So I'll take you through the concepts, I'll take you through how we manage these ideas and where we go from here. And then, so this is what we'll do then. That. When I'm asked to talk to politicians, which I often am, and I'm told, tell them what is the most important topic we have to work on. And I don't give them the jargon at the top there, the big idea how to maintain and protect ecological structure and function, blah, 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 blah. I give the bit at the bottom. Our big idea is to look after the natural stuff and deliver the human stuff from the oceans. That's our big idea. Right. And we do that because of those things that you see at the left of the screen there. We have to recover from the historical legacy. We've screwed up the oceans. And to screw up is a biological term. We've screwed up the oceans. We've endangered the functions. We've got the legislation, as you'll see, for this, but we have to cope with things like climate change and many other problems and that. Now, there's a lot of text on some of these slides, and I don't expect you to read it all, just scan it. And if anyone wants the presentation, then just email me, and I'm happy to give it to you. I'm not possessive about these things. That. Many of you are familiar with these terms, the green economy and green growth, relating to mostly the terrestrial areas, and we've had green growth and green economy for many decades there. The last decade or two, probably the last 15 years, we've been talking about the blue economy and blue growth relating to the oceans, and you're familiar with that. So with Arturus and Romanus and Maciek, and a very good dear friend, David Tagliapetra, who's no longer with us, we started looking at this idea of emerald growth and the emerald economy. That is the bit between the green and the blue, for the bit related to estuaries or transitional waters, as we now often call them there. So it's a concept that we're saying is fundamental to a particular part of our environment on which both the marine system relies and the terrestrial system relies. And what I want to do is take you through the importance of those and then take you through how we manage these. So, as most of you know, or all of you know, before we can study any topic, we need to understand our system. So, a while ago now, Alan Whitfield and Alan in South Africa, we started saying, well, what are the fundamental characteristics of these environments, transitional waters, the lagoons, the estuaries, the rias, the fjords, and so on? So we came up with a set of paradigms for this. The fact that it's an ecosystem in its own right. Estuaries and lagoons, they just used to be regarded by the marines people as the inlet of a sea, and by the freshwater people as the ends of rivers. And then we decided, no, actually, they're rather more than that. They're influenced by scale, not only within the estuary, but also sort of very far away. You know, eels migrating across the Atlantic, birds moving from the high Arctic to feed in the estuaries, and so on there and that. As most of you will realize, understanding the biology of anything relies on understanding the physics of the system, the way the system behaves. We can't understand the ecology unless we understand the physics and the chemistry. Right there. We understand where the organic matter comes from, what fuels them, and how they are created and maintained. And we need to look at their variability, their diversity, their tolerances, their pressures, and so on. We need to understand all of those. And paradoxically, they are constantly variable, which is quite a nice phrase. They respond to what we call unbounded boundaries, that is, things happening a long way away, relating them, and also to moving baselines. Because of some of these features, they're both resistant and also resilient. They bounce back easily. And they have certain specific features, but we haven't got time to go into that. So the challenges for managing these are many, you know. Do we know why their pressures are there? Do we know what's happening to them? Do we understand the changes? Do we understand them in societal and economic terms? So do we know how to address these? And that's really what I want to touch on there. You've just heard mention about the ecosystem approach, and it's something that you should all have ingrained into your soft drives, your cranial soft drives. Right there. So we've had the ecosystem approach for a long time. It was now 40 years or so, 30 odd years. It's an approach. It's an approach to what we want to do to our systems. And how do we do it? We do it by management. So we move from EBA to EBM, and you've just this. And I would hope that most of you understand what EBM is. I should have said that throughout this talk, I'm going to refer to a set of European projects, Horizon Europe projects. In ICES, our research company, we have 5 of these. And I'll refer to work that's being done about these. And some of this work is going to be discussed at the session Q this afternoon and on Wednesday. So in one of these, Just4Cs, with work by Nadia Papadopoulou and our friends, we were interrogating some of these terms. And one of the recent papers that we're now exploring further is this continuum, EBA to EBM to EBTM. The TM is technical measures. How do you actually achieve some of this? And we know for things like EBM, we have lots of principles, and we now need methods to put those into action. And one of the papers with Anita Franco in press at the moment is looking at those. So we have all of these sectors, and I'll talk in a minute about where those sectors give us problems, but we have all those sectors, these 13 social economic sectors, and I guess most of you will be familiar with these. And your research will actually be dependent on many of those. So we have those sectors, some of those mapped directly onto the European Marine Strategy Framework Directive, or in a stupid country like the UK, we call it the UK Marine Strategy, but let's not get on to Brexit because it makes me depressed. Unfortunately, its proponents won't admit they were wrong, but they were. From those, we start looking at the problems that all of those cause, and some of you have seen this before, a cause-consequence-response relationship. Something that has adapted over the years, but the latest version is dapsy-worm. I was a benthic biologist for many years, so dapsy-worm sticks. Where we have the drivers, which is our basic social needs. You know, we want food, we want employment, we want enjoyment, and so on. How do we get those? We get them by carrying out activities. The activities cause problems, pressures, what we call the mechanisms of change. What are they changing? They're changing the natural system, the state change. And if we keep doing that, we lead to impacts on human welfare, And therefore, we need to do something. We bring in responses. So let's take you through building up the model there. So we start off, and many of you are looking at the ecology in detail. And let's follow this line that if we know the physics and chemistry, we'll know what sort of ecology will start to be in a place. That then eventually moves to society, what we want to do to it. And if I could see your hands, I would ask you where the quote from that paper comes from, but you can tell me later. Not there. So the basic idea is the system can create, its own functioning, and that leads to something called ecosystem services. And then from those, we get societal goods and benefits. And I'll explain that in more detail, because this has been a fairly major change in the last 10 years or so. So within that, we have a cycle. We want drivers, our employment, our food, and so on. We carry out activities. The activities put in what we call human assets, complementary assets. We add skills and money and time and energy and the ability that we are sentient. We add those in, and we get societal or socioeconomic and cultural goods and benefits, and that satisfies our drivers. But, and there is always a but, those activities then create pressures. They create pressures on the natural system, they create pressures on the human system. And if those pressures keep occurring, we turn the system grey, we screw it up. So what we then do is we bring in various management measures, and I'll talk about this later, and hopefully they turn the grey bit back to the green and blue and deliver our services. Okay? So you've got that bit? Right. Problem is, it gets a bit more complicated. When we're looking at transitional waters, the bit in the middle there, we know that all of that system is then affected by the same system out at sea, the top right-hand side, and in the catchment. You see now, and I'll mention it later if I've got time, this is why we started moving to working on systems analysis. One of the people in ICES, Gemma Smith, is working on systems analysis, again with some people in the university, but looking at the relationship between this. So it gets complicated, but of course it's complicated. This is the real environment there. So we're looking at the relationships between those, and that's what emerald growth is, and the emerald economy. It's trying to say, how can we maintain this stuff in the estuaries, the lagoons, the rivers, and so on, knowing what happens in the catchment and also out at sea. Now, I made a comment earlier about ecosystem services, and I noticed there were papers this week on ecosystem services. But in thinking about this for a while now, and I suddenly realized we've actually made it a much more complicated system than it should be. So over the last, 10 years or so, we've split ecosystem services from societal goods and benefits. What we've said is that the natural domain can function, can have its own structure, and it can produce a service. It can deliver something, eventually for us. The only problem is that take benefit from those ecosystem services, we have to do something. We have to get off our butts, and do something. We have to put in energy and time and be sentient and so on. And if we do that, we give us our societal goods and benefits. So, for example, those of you working on ecosystem services, if you tell me that there are cultural services in the ecosystem, I would tell you there aren't. There are cultural benefits that we get. You know, the ecosystem doesn't make a differentiation between a blue whale and a polychaete worm. Only we do that. It doesn't tell you something is a nice seascape. Only we do that there. So because of that, we can then say, well, we've got this sequence going from the natural system to the human system, and we can start valuing this. So in one of the projects, Marbefes, that's been talked about this afternoon in session Q, we have been looking at how we do ecological valuation of systems, how we do social ecological valuation, and then how we do socioeconomic valuation of it. So how do we value that? Now, why do we need to value it? Well, we need to value it because we've got lots of hazards in the environment. We've got natural hazards, and they lead to risks. Now, a hazard becomes a risk when it affects something that we're worried about. So as you see there, we have all of these, and many of these are natural hazards that are going to occur anyway. We might make them worse by our own actions, like removing mangroves from areas that remove coastal defences, but we've got them. And then finishing this hazard and risk typology, there's a whole load of others, and you see there, and we're going to be talking about those. Putting it in very local terms, you can go to any nearby area. I've been to Klaipeda many times, and you could look along the coast here, and you can see many of these problems that are occurring, what are called pressures. We split those pressures into exogenic ones. Those are coming from outside the system, like climate change, where when we're managing an area, like an estuary, a ria, the lagoon here, or a bit of coastline, we're not managing the causes of that, but we have to manage the consequences. And then we've got the endogenic ones, things that happen in an area, a port, a power station, or whatever, where we have to manage both the causes and the consequences of those. In a little while, with a very, very good friend in Uruguay, Omar De Feo, we decided that this should be called the triple whammy. If you listen to politicians speaking, they're speaking in threes. You've got this, you've got this, you've got this. I think they work on the basis that we have a limited ability to cope with more than three things. So we started looking at the triple whammy, the fact that estuaries and coasts worldwide, and this was based on analysis we did in a lot of areas. All of these, we've got increased industrialization and urbanization, increased use of resources, and decreased resistance and resilience to wider things. A whammy's a punch. There. Every one of those activities has got, every one of those activities has a footprint, and it may be quite small. That activity footprint gives rise to precious footprints, which is larger. Those precious footprints give rise to effects footprints, and those need management footprints. And Angel, Roland, and I have published several papers on this at the moment. But as a quick example of that, take a suction hopper dredger. It's the area of its activity, its drag head may be quite small, but the pressures that come from that are much bigger because the far field and near field effects, and then the effects on the natural system, on the human system, are even bigger. And then we can take something that comes up this week, shipping. This is from Ida May El Hasselhoff that I'm working with in Göteborg at the moment at Chalmers there, looking at shipping activities and footprints. So we need to know the activity, we need to know its footprint, we need to see how that extends to the precious footprint from it, and then the effects footprint. And as Hen said, no talk is complete without at least one horrendogram. There's going to be more than that. This has not been published yet, it's in press. But these are all the things that if you're concerned about shipping and ports, these are the things that you're worried about. So knowing those, now we want to get onto the estuary part of it. For a while now, we've been using models that industry use for looking at risk assessment and risk management. Industries all the time have to assess the risks and manage the risks. So we've been using a technique, bow tie analysis, which is an ISO standard technique. It started with Roland Cormier in Canada, where it's been used by industries a lot, but it's only since about 2011 we started using it as the environment. And it's quite simple. Conceptually, it's very simple. You have that circle in the middle, which is the thing you're worried about, what is my problem? The blue boxes are the causes of that problem. Can we put prevention between the causes and your problem? If you can't stop it by preventing the problem, then can you put in mitigation, which is now on the right side of the central problem, and does it lead to consequences? And in several of the projects we're working on at the moment, for example, this is Marine Plan, we are building these models for specific problems and that. And then just very quickly, one of the hot topics at the moment, and there's sessions on it this week, are to do with cumulative impacts and the way that. So we've got a fairly good idea of what a single activity is, but what happens when you start putting them together. And that led a little while ago now, I forget when this was published, a few years ago now, the idea that we have a system and we bring in an activity, so a system and it's got a lot of environmental quality, we bring in an activity and we reduce some quality. So you can see the first line there goes down. We put in mitigation measures and you get the dotted line, it comes up. Then we add another activity. We lose a bit more quality, we put in mitigation, we get a bit better back. And we keep putting in those activities until we reach a state that we don't really want to reach. That's the green line. And that might be called good ecological status in the Water Framework Directive, or it might be called good environmental status in the Marine Strategy Directive. Now let's come back to this idea of the creation, performance, and protection of emerald growth. We have all of these activities occurring in our estuaries and our lagoons. And you can see them there, sort of with fisheries and the ecology and water quality and so. Each of our actions is affecting those. And so what they're going to do is they're going to reduce the emerald growth, they're going to remove the emerald growth, and eventually they're going to remove the emerald economy as well. All that's happening within that. The only problem is some of that is occurring inside the estuary and some of the problems are from outside the estuary. So they're the first set, then a second set where we're looking at carbon problems, what's happening to the labile and refractory carbon and so on, the ports, the navigation, the nutrient effects, of which there's massive amounts of work on the Baltic. And so we need to control these. And then the final slide in this series, knowing the sediments, the hydrodynamics, the stratification, and so on. So we need all that information in order to say, how can we protect the estuaries, the emerald growth, the emerald economy, but still allow the natural system to occur and get the human system. Now, quick diversion. Yep, there's a lot on there. We started looking at the importance of links between areas, and we looked at three things there. We looked at connectivity, and I'm going to go into this in detail in a minute. Are areas physically linked in some way, a catchment to an estuary, to a marine system, and so on? Are they physically linked? Are marine protected areas physically linked in some way? But I just want to introduce two other terms that we started using, which is coherence and equivalence, and these relate more to management. I mean, the paper goes into this in huge detail. But the one in Ocean and Coastal Management in 2023. Coherence is where we do the same type of management in different areas, but to get the same output. So in different parts of the estuary, freshwater system, different estuaries, we do the same thing, like have the Water Framework Directive. Yeah. Equivalence, on the other hand, is where we can do different things, but to get the same output. Now, as many of you know, under European directives, very often, if they're a framework directive, it allows a member state to implement them in the way they need to, but with a certain endpoint in mind. So, equivalence there. And I'll come back to these later and that there. So how do we ensure that when we're trying to manage across these boundaries in estuaries and catchments, across estuaries, between estuaries and seas, across seas and so on, how do we get that? So we started looking at connectivity, coherence, and equivalence in all of these different domains, in the natural sciences, the social economy, and so on. And I haven't got time to go into all of those, but you'll get the message as we go through. Many of you are working on fish. I don't know how many are working on estuarine fish, but many of you are working on fish in some way. So let's just take the things I've just been saying and relate them to estuarine fishes. And for those who need it, we published 2 volumes a couple of years ago, Fish and Fishes in Estuaries, a global review. And it's sort of all you need to know about fishes and fisheries in estuaries, but we're afraid to ask. Right? 2 large volumes right there. So what we started doing is say, well, let's look at the components we have in estuaries for fish in estuaries, and then what we can do is look at how they contribute to this emerald growth and the emerald economy, and how they get affected by our pressures. Now, you need a bit more background information. A long time ago, we started looking at different groups of fishes, guilds, or biological traits. We were calling them guilds. Lots of different life histories, and this started in the 1990s, before some of you were born, probably, just frightening. And we were looking at the different types. We were then talking, this was in a recent paper that Alan and I did, where we were looking at the different patterns of fish, the relation to connectivity, and how we are gaining and losing connectivity in these systems. Now let's come back to this idea of connectivity. Trying to look at why connectivity is so important. And I'm sure you know all this anyway, but it's why it's important. And the fact that if we disrupt connectivity in an estuary, we screw up the landward part, and also we can screw up the seaward part for some species like eels and salmon and shads and so on. There. So trying to look at the connectivity that creates that emerald growth and that emerald economy becomes fundamental to this. We started looking at all these different types of connectivity, the associations that we've got within fish and the environment and how it leads to the links and so on. So we went through these different types of connectivity. And I mean, now it sounds obvious, doesn't it? Of course, connectivity is important in estuaries. But we needed to tell people, and we needed to tell people because we were doing things in estuaries that were messing up that connectivity. It's particularly important, this is one of the papers in that book I mentioned, one of the chapters by Ed Hood and Ken Abel and co. in the States, very good friends, on not only looking at this in relation to the adult stages, but especially looking at it in relation to the larval stages. So we then started saying, okay, let's see how we can manage this and where are the problems coming from that are going to affect that connectivity and then affect the emerald growth, the emerald economy and so on, because of the way we use the fish. And so we started looking at this. This is one of Ken Abel's figures that look at all the features on that. And one of the biggest challenges we've got for these transitional waters at the moment is because we keep doing something to break that connectivity. In this case, you can see all the things that are stopping the connectivity, whether it's these are the temporary barriers. Some of those are natural. No, we can get dissolved oxygen sags naturally. We can get suspended sediment plumes and so on. But also the anthropogenic ones. When we put contaminants or organic matter into the estuaries, we can create barriers It's a temporary barrier because we can do things to remove them. And then particularly, this is a big thing worldwide now, is the permanent barriers that we've got, and the dams, the weirs, and so on, that is destroying that link between the catchment, the estuary, and the sea. And as you see from the bottom corner there, worldwide now we're starting to move these permanent barriers. So we'll go on to sort of how we manage this. What do we do in order to manage it? Well, all of our countries have signed up to those international principles of how we manage the environment. You'll recognize them all. The only one that you might query is the fact that what used to be called the polluter pays principle, we talk about the damage or debt principle, because it's not just pollution we're worried about there. So we then started to say, well, let's look at what tools have we got to manage all those. And a long time ago now, we started working on a set of tenets. It started as 6, then became 7, now it's 10. And 10's a nice number. I'm not going to add any more to it. And these are the 10 things. If you think about when you want to try and manage a system, they're the 10 things that you have to get in line. Of course, you want it to be ecologically sustainable, your management. But have you got the technology to do that? Have you got the economics to do that? You might have the technology, but it's so expensive, nobody will pay for it. What does society desire or tolerate? Society might desire clean waters, but society tolerates putting sewage into the sea. What are the legal parts of this and the administrative parts? What is our political masters? Alan mentioned earlier about our science being under threat from certain world leaders and politicians and so on. Not mentioning any names. What about the ethics of what we do? We need to clean up the system, but we don't use our own money. We use our future generations' money, my grandkids' money, in order to clean it up and that. And then what about the culture and the communication? So we started then exploring this in more detail and looking at several of those tenets. 5 of them are quantitative, 5 of them are narrative. The recent paper that came out, it sort of came out a couple of months ago now, where we've explored these in even more detail, and I'm afraid you have to read the paper to go into all detail. But what that diagram on the right shows, well, firstly, it shows a sequence from ecosystem-based approach to ecosystem-based management to ecosystem-based technical measures. Then it shows that of those 10 tenets, 2 of them are overall dominant, the ecology and communication. That's why we're all sitting here. They are dominant. But of the others, there is a cascading of those tenets from at the top, no, you can't read it. But at the top, it's the societal and cultural aspects. Then it goes through the governance ones, and the laws and administration, and eventually to the economics and the technology. And we're just starting to explore that even more. But what we've said is that these tenets are not equally weighted. The ecology one and the communication one should be higher. Of the other tenets, it depends on who you talk to. If you talk to a politician, they'll tell you their tenet is most highly rated. If you talk to the economists, and it's the economists who run things, then they'll say theirs is most highly rated. So the next point is, well, where are we managing? And I'm going to have to go over this quickly, but we're managing everything from a very small activity footprint, the drag head of a dredger, all the way up to global systems. I've just finished the driver's chapter for the World Ocean Assessment 3. I was one of the authors of World Ocean Assessment 2. I'm just finished and led the driver's chapter, and we're trying to look at this management in a world ocean take. And then what legislation have we got? And many of you have seen this before, because it's not only been used a lot, it's been adapted, and it's now in several of these European projects. It's been used in each area. For those who haven't seen this, this shows the cascade from global legislation in the middle all the way out to local national legislation at the end. And then if you've got a chance to read it, as you go around that circle, it tells you everything from the fisheries and navigation and marine archaeology and all of the things there. And we know that in order to manage all this, we need vertical integration of that, going all the way from the global to the local, or the local to the global. And we need horizontal integration. We need to integrate the fisheries management, the navigation management, the conservation management, the recreation management, and so on. We need to manage all those. Putting that in more local terms, apologies for people from the other side of the Atlantic, but this is showing the European legislation, putting it on a map, and it shows where we have the legislation and what are the jurisdictions of those. So, for example, the estuary comes into quite a lot of those, but the legislation, as we all know, is, well, it's not only going out to 200 nautical miles, it's going even further now, out to areas beyond national jurisdiction. So the next one is, how are we managing this? Well, we're managing them by having lots of management plans, programs of measures, which some of you have come across, monitoring schemes, smart indicators, indicators that are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time-dependent. Ways of checking if management is working, having lots of management bodies and so on. So we've got lots of stuff out there to manage this. And as an example, we can then say, well, okay, who is doing the management? And again, several of these projects, Marbefes, Marine Sabres, and Marine Plan, have been looking at, they've been mapping who is doing all the marine management and therefore the estuarine management. And so we have these organograms of that. The last one was a horrendogram. This is an organogram. But we've got these showing these. And many of you will be aware now of having many of these bodies, and you'll probably recognize what many of those bodies do, what the fisheries bodies do, what the marine spatial planning bodies do, or maritime spatial planning, what the EPAs do, and so on. So what we started looking at was, well, this thing I said earlier, we have activity footprints, we have pressures footprints, and we have effects footprints. So we started looking at the management footprint. It's a paper that Roland Cormier, DFO in Canada, led with Ankel Borger and I, where we were looking at the size of those management footprints and trying to look at the links between them in order to try and get a handle on why we should do local management and then what does it lead to. Yeah. So, give you a recipe for this. Many of you are gathering the evidence for this. We're all gathering for the evidence for it. I, my assistants, my postgrads, and so on. We're gathering the evidence for this. Trying to gather the evidence for what the activities are doing, what the pressures are doing, what the ecology is doing, how the pressures occur, what the impacts are, what are the responses of management measures, and so on. We're trying to bring all those into this one system. And I hope you can see, as you look through the papers this week, or you sit and watch the papers this week, you can see where some of these, or those papers fit in on this scheme. So let's try and bring this all together. And there's more and more projects now, more and more schemes now that are trying to bring it together and say, okay, how we've got all of this stuff, and we're trying to protect the natural stuff and the human stuff. We've got all the legislation, we've got the management, we've got the governance, we've got the authorities that do this, we've got it all. You might say, well, why the hell doesn't it work then? But let's come back to that later. So bringing all this together, there are more and more cases now where we're creating systems analysis approach, and I'll come back to this in a minute, We're creating decision support systems. So Arturas Razinkovas here is working with us on decision support systems. I think Arturas is going to talk about this later. We've published on estuarine planning support systems and ways of bringing this together. And I just want to talk about a bit of that. And it's the reason, because of this complexity, is why I started working with a group of systems analysts. So this is way out of biology. There's a whole language, there's a whole field on systems analysis. So I started saying, well, what would systems analysis look like? And I was asked by our Ministry of the Environment, could you come up with a scheme for systems analysis for the marine area? No. So can we bring that together? And the scheme that I devised a while ago, and then we've modified since, is this scheme. That we realize that we've got 3 blocks, and I hope you can all fit yourself into one of these blocks somewhere. I'm sure you can. Block A, which is setting priorities, what is our vision for the system, what do we need to do, what information do we need, and so on. So that's setting the scene. That's where Dapsy-worm and all the others come from. The next block, B, which I think most of you will fit in, is gathering the evidence. Go and gather the ecological evidence, the physical, chemical evidence, the economic evidence, the societal evidence, and so on. Just gather that. Make sure you've got good data. Make sure you know the confidence in your data, and so on. And then the third block, C, is using that. So 3 blocks, it's quite simple, isn't it? But there's always a but. When you then start looking at those 3 blocks, you realize that there's actually a whole set of subsystems. And this is something we published 5 years ago now. Looking at that, within A, there are these different ways of creating our vision and so on there. Within B, all the different types of data we get that many of you are gathering. And within C, using those data. And we've got a paper coming out that's led by Ankel Borger, which is all about the science policy links and how we have an influence on it. And just for those of you who are early career researchers, Gemma Smith in IX, she's got a paper coming out with a lot of other ECRs, early career researchers, on the way early career researchers can influence policy as well. So these 2 papers coming out now. And that. So the importance of systems analysis, bringing that into this complex field of marine management is getting quite important. And the paper that Gemma Smith's just led on, and this came out of the Marine Sabres meeting, which is going to be subject of the Marine Sabres project, rather, led by Emma Verling from University College Cork, and Emma's here. So this is going to be in some of the talks this afternoon, or that project is anyway. But what Gemma was doing was looking at this integrated systems analysis, and what she's done, what we've all done, but Gemma was leading it, is operationalizing that, trying to make sure that we can, we've got the methods for each part of this, and a bit difficult for you to read it, but in essence, what that shows is the Dapsy-worm system superimposed with a systems analysis system, and then for each of the blocks on there, there is a standard operating procedure that tells you how to do it. And then that is that. So we've got this is the social ecological system, and then the next step is work with Arturas, is putting that into a decision support system, which is what we're doing now. So you see how they've all been built up on this and that. Now, coming to the final comments, and I've no idea how we are with time because we started early. So don't give me more time. We'll go on for ages. So these are the final comments there. Emphasizing that the systems we're looking at, they work because they function properly because of connectivity. And that's not just when we're talking about catchment, estuary, marine continuum. That's when we're talking about the marine realm as a whole. Starting off with SMART objectives and this idea of knowing what your vision is, what are the techniques you've got to achieve that, what are the tools and so on. This, what we're now calling this EBA to EBM to EBTM continuum. Relying on good science. I think this was mentioned earlier. No, if we don't do good science, then no one's going to listen to us anyway there. Right. Quantifying these 4 footprints: activities, pressures, effects, management footprints. And the ROAM, the risk and opportunity assessment and management. Now, I was talking mostly about risks, but one of the things that we started doing when that bow tie analysis I showed is also looking at opportunities. And dare I say it, on the one project we had, series led by Myron Peck, we not only looked at risks to the marine system and the estuarine system, we looked at opportunities as well. And I know it might be a bit unpalatable, but actually you can look at climate change as having opportunities as well. But of course the risks outweigh it there. And that. Collecting the right sort of data. Collect data to use and use the data collected. And we don't. We often collect data and then it acts as like a nice security blanket, something like a Snoopy cartoon, or a Peanuts cartoon, really. No, it's a security blanket. We've got it just in case. Well, for heaven's sakes, just use it there and that. Valuation. If you want to get the message over, talk in the language that the politicians, the policymakers are talking, and they're talking in economics. There is a hierarchy when we're trying to manage systems. We protect people, we protect the economy, we protect the natural system. And the natural system comes third, and sometimes it's a poor third. So if I'm trying to get someone to try and protect the environment, I don't talk to them about protecting the polychaetes and the zooplankton and so on. I talk to them about protecting the economy, and then if we get that right and do it properly, we protect the ecology as well there. Okay, harmonizing the governance, getting all these organograms and horrendograms, we know what we've got, trying to make, it'd be nice to try and simplify some of them. Yeah, they won't. The horrendogram, just as an aside, the horrendogram I put up, I've had detailed discussions with Brexiteers. I promise not to mention Brexit, but I'll mention it. With Brexiteers who saw that and they saw the sum total of European legislation, and they said, that's why we need to get out of Brussels. And I say, do you want fish you can eat? Yes. Do you want waters you can swim in? Yes, yes. Do you want to move goods around? Yes, yes, yes. Do you want to be able to swim? Yes, yes, yes. That's why we need all that legislation. It's all there for a reason. And it's quite pleasing that the Brits helped to write some of it. But that's in the past. And it will be the future as well. So harmonizing those and using systems analysis and social ecological systems. And then the bottom line is all about the global footprint. And then some people know I collect cartoons, especially political cartoons. But I kept noticing that the person in cartoons always causing the problems seemed to be some old bald-headed guy with glasses. Nothing sees. So I hope that's not only shown you where the journey we've taken and shown you some of the new ideas. Nobody had seen, some people had seen some of those slides. Nobody had seen all of them because it's new stuff. But I hope it also allows you to put your work into perspective for this week. My thanks to EU Connect for helping to get me here, and thanks to ICES for helping to get me here as well. It's been great, and I look forward to meeting old friends, but also making some new ones this week. Many thanks. Okay. You all right?
Thank you, Mike. I will check whether this is what... Yes, this was, thank you, Mike. Very inspiring, very entertaining. And we saw at least some of your famous parallelograms. Unreadable, but we can always check your publications.
Yes.
So
Please.
are there any questions to Mike?
My apologies, the lights are so bright that if you ask, I've got no chance of seeing you, so I can hear you. And as they say, where there's tea, there's hope.
Hi, Mike. Great talk. Ed Hindozan here from your UK Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs.
Great.
My question is more about ICES, I guess. I love the horrendograms, but at some stage we kind of need to think, how do we get past the horrendograms, I guess? And one term which gets used quite a bit in our community now is institutional sustainability. So in the past, we've always talked about sustainability first as probably environmental sustainability, then maybe in the 70s, economic sustainability, and now a bit of social sustainability as well. But if you package all the systems approaches and the horrendograms into kind of thinking about institutions and how they can be sustainable, how can communities like ICES and the governments in the nations within the ICES region, how can we set ourselves up to be able to manage for institutional sustainability?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a good point. Sorry, I can't see where you're speaking from.
I'm over here, but don't worry.
Oh, okay, right. I'm looking in this direction. Yeah, and it's a nice question. Well, we might have spoken about it before. We do have problems with sustainability and institutional sustainability because many organizations, not least DEFRA, have such a high turnover of staff that sometimes you worry, am I going to speak to the same person time after time? But DEFRA's got some great people in it and that. But those rely on, they might change, but they rely on the quality of the science that we're giving. And that's the importance of ICES, isn't it? It's making sure, I've been on various ICES working groups, and it's giving that quality of science, the quality of advice, the consistency. Sometimes, I think you're touching on this, sometimes we give ourselves problems because we give conflicting advice. Or even we give uncertain advice, but that's the nature of the beast and that. But by giving good advice, giving consistent advice, I'm hoping that an organisation like ICES, been going for 100 years, has got that consistency through it and that. So you're right, all of those sustainabilities. In fact, I suspect you could probably go through all of those 10 tenets and you can add sustainability on each one. And nowadays people would say, economic sustainability and cultural sustainability and so on. So we all have a role to play in that. But your point about the horrendograms and this, I've often said we have made it too complex. We in the UK, well, actually it's the same in many countries because we know what the evidence is like. We have one body managing fisheries, another body managing the conservation, another one navigation, and so on. And we hope that these talk together, but very often they don't. Even if they're in the same building, they don't always talk together. So we do have a role there. I think people have often said to me, with this such complex system, does it not work? And I've said, no, it works, but I think it works more by accident than design. It works, in some countries it works because you have the same people in different bodies. There'll be a lot of people here will have a role in ICES, but they'll also go and talk to OSPAR or HELCOM or the European Commission and so on. So it is there, but we still need to work on it. But probably talk over beer as well. Thanks.
We have still time for a few additional questions. Anyone? Yes, I can't see, but if there is anyone, so please, microphone.
Thank you. Pierre Petitgat, France. You said we have all the framework, and you described it very well, but, and you also said, but we have problems to make it work. So my question is, what is it missing for the actors to effectively find a common solution? Mm-hmm. If actors don't want to talk to each other, or if they have interests and they want to gain the negotiation rather than find a solution that is good for everyone. So what is your framework missing for this to happen?
That's really interesting. Someone asked me a while, sorry, I can't get away from Brexit. During Brexit, our minister, the Minister for the Environment, said, Brexit will give us a chance to revise the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, and we might decide that it's not got things in it we can put in and we can remove things. And I defied them to work out what was missing in it. And I don't think there is anything missing in it, the way you interpret it and that there. I think it is all there. The reason why I was hesitating about why does the system work is the thing I said just now, that we don't always have groups talking to each other. You know, I've been in administrations, and I've been talking about, say, the Water Framework Directive, and then I've mentioned conservation. They say, oh no, you don't want us. You want the nature conservation people. They're either in the next block, the next room, the next building, the next city in there. So we've got all this, but it isn't joined up. And we have deliberately fragmented it. And one of the reasons I think we've deliberately fragmented it is because we've all had governments, usually right-of-centre governments, that don't like big government. They don't want to join ministries together, when actually in some cases it would be sensible. In the UK, or actually in England, we have the Marine Management Organisation, which is a step towards having all of these things together. In Ireland, they have the Department of the Marine, but I think they've changed that now. So countries are moving to say, we need a ministry for the marine, or we need one organisation. Industry are crying out for that, because industry are saying, when I want to get something, a new wind farm built or a new bit of dredging or whatever, I have to go to talk to all these different bodies. I really want what is called a one-stop shop. So industry wants simplicity. We in the marine have said we want simplicity, but very often governments are saying, no, we don't want to put all those things together. It would give us such a big organisation, and we don't like big organisations. So that's one thing. I think the other thing that we're getting now is some of governments are saying, let's have a smaller statutory role, because the voluntary sector and citizen science, they can do it anyway. Now, I'm all for citizen science, I'm all for the voluntary sector, but I also want good administration. And that's there. So trying to bring those together, trying to bring the groups together, again, just as a short aside, in the UK or in England, we had something called the Marine Conservation Zone process. And that was to be stakeholder-led, and so it brought together groups of stakeholders. Each region had to bring together a group of stakeholders. The stakeholders had to sit down and agree to where we should have MPAs. Sit down with maps or GIS and that. And what we found, I was on the government advisory panel for this, and what we found is that the stakeholders were agreeing to what we call the lowest common denominator. The stakeholders would agree to something that's simple that they could all agree to. So, for example, if in an area there was part of the seabed, the wind farm people didn't want it, the conservation people said it's no good, the fisheries people said we don't go there, and all of these, and they said that's where we can have the marine protected area. It's the area where nobody wanted, that's the lowest common denominator. Well, that's not what we should have happened. We should have gone for what is the best area for an MPA. So you can get people together, but even then they don't agree. It's what we call, you can take the horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Well, all of us here have to try and make the horse drink, I think. But see.
So next question, please. I think there was some. Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Hen. Hi, Mike. Thanks for your talk. Chris Lynham from the ICES
Oh,
Secretariat here.
hi, Chris.
Hey. It's great to see the breadth of your work, and I think some of the work on the bow ties and the DAPSI worm will be really useful when we're improving our ecosystem advice in future. But I had a really specific comment. You mentioned when you were talking about cumulative effects that we're introducing, new activities and reducing resilience. And at the bottom, we got to this dashed line, and you said that's good environmental status. And I was thinking, are you saying that because good environmental status allows for sustainable activities, and there was still resilience in the system in your diagram, and therefore there should be recoverability? And do you agree that we need to demonstrate that removal of those activities will lead to recovery to some level? Or are you happy that at that point there's resilience and things aren't going to collapse?
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Chris. I mean, I guess many of you have seen David Attenborough's recent film, Oceans. And one of the things that he's tried to do is not say it's all doom and gloom, the whole system is going to get worse. I have a little bit of a problem with the film because in one shot he goes from stopping bottom trawling as a way of solving coral bleaching. I think he's missed a bit out somewhere in that, but obviously the film's not made for professors in marine biology. But one of the messages of that, and something that we've all been trying to say, is perhaps we are underestimating the resilience of the system, its ability to bounce back. And also, by the way, we confuse resilience and resistance. Resistance is can we stop something? Resilience is can it bounce back? So I think we need to make sure that we know that resilience, we know that the systems are resilient, and they do recover. In restoration of systems, there's two types of restoration, what we call passive restoration and active restoration. Passive restoration, you remove the pressures, the system recovers. If that doesn't work, we use active restoration, we do something, replanting, restocking, reseeding, and so on. So we can do that. And I think we're now seeing systems do recover from those local pressures. It's what I call the exogenic pressures, it's the climate change pressures. Will our systems recover for that? And that's the rather more challenging one there. I didn't get a chance, Chris, to go into detail, but cumulative effects is probably the biggest challenge we should have in this room at the moment. I mentioned we're pretty good. If someone comes to me and says we want to do some dredging, or you, when you're working in CFAS and things, if they want to come to us and say we want to do some dredging, we know what the effects will be. We know how to control it. We know what the near and far field and so on. When you get to, okay, what is the effects of dredging and fishing and all these together, that's where we're not very good. There are more and more systems like Ben Halpen's work, and I've published with Ben, on trying to bring these things together like his Ocean Health Index. But many of the systems at the moment are additive. If you've got 5 activities in an area, your cumulative effects is 5, when in fact we know that's not the case. But what we haven't yet got is a good system for weighting these, for scaling them, for knowing that there are synergistic and antagonistic effects between activities. Just for Sea is one of the projects that we're in, led by Uncle Borger, they mentioned. What we're trying to do, actually you're in Just for Seas. What we're trying to do with Just for Seas is look at those cumulative effects. And we still haven't got a handle on it. I didn't spend any time on it, but cumulative effects of getting all these things working, that is one of the biggest challenges we've got in both marine and estuarine systems. The final bit about resilience, and I was talking about estuaries. Estuaries, we realise, are resilient because they are so used to high variability. If you're in a system where the salinity changes by orders of magnitude several times or twice a day. Temperature changes huge amounts and so on. The sediments change. We know that they are resilient. What we call the estuarine quality paradox in a paper a long time ago. But we know that variability is resilience. So I think we're now more honest about it, but we still have to, we still have to work on more. Final point is what we know about inshore systems, we're now having to move that to wider systems, to offshore systems. I'm part of a GSAMP group, Working Group 41, which is looking at ocean adaptation to climate change and the techniques we've got. And it's looking at restoration and recovery techniques going out past areas beyond national jurisdiction. They're the challenges we've got now. I think we know the challenges inshore, we just have to stop them. But what about offshore? That's one there. So we'll catch up. That's good.
Thank you. I think we can take 2 more questions. So yes, please.
Okay. Good morning, Professor Elliott. First of all, thank you for reacting to my request for invite in a social media for professional use. I was very honored for that. My name is Juan Ronco. I am a former official who worked in DG Mare in maritime or marine spatial planning. You may have heard that the Commission has launched the so-called Ocean Pact, which is in fact, you could call it integrated maritime policy with new clauses or 2.0. There is mention of having some sort of legal instrument which will build on the Maritime Spatial Planning Directive. What would you think, what is your thinking of having both directives merged? I mean, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive and the Maritime Spatial Planning Directive, and even perhaps the Common Fisheries Policy as well, because it has a special components. So what is your thinking about this? And also what is your thinking about, you were mentioning cumulative effects, having a kind of proofing of all policy initiatives that would be launched, a kind of oceans proofing or a kind of waterproofing, so that to make sure that there is some sort of coherence across all policies, because that's the main idea of the Ocean Pact, so that this, for instance, cumulative effects are reduced as much as possible.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very good. Yes, excellent. Our friend from DEFRA will mention that, we talk about EIAs, environmental impact assessment, but also we have health impact assessments, economic impact assessment, but we have a regulatory impact assessment, what our government just calls impact assessment. And that should look at these links between them. Your point about the MSFD, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, and the MSPD, there's only a letter difference, the Marine Spatial Planning Directive, I not only totally agree with you, I'd go further. In some countries now, we are regarding the MSPD, the Marine Strategy, the Marine Spatial Planning, Maritime Spatial Planning Directive, as part of the programs of measures for the MSFD. Sorry, for those of you from outside Europe, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive relies on, you find the problem, you have a program of measures to try and get back to this thing called good environmental status. The Water Framework Directive has the same thing, program of measures to get back to good ecological status. What we're now realizing in certain countries, and it'd be nice to hear from people if this is true in many countries, but we're now hearing that the Spatial Planning Directive is regarded as part of the program of measures of the MSFD. And that is eminently sensible, and it's something we've been saying for probably a couple of years now. So the Maritime Spatial Planning Directive is a way of reaching the MSFD. Now, at the beginning, I said there's a big idea, look after the natural system, deliver the human system. The MSFD is looking after the natural system. The MSPD is delivering the human system. And you're right, that's why they need to be brought together. But of course, as the Commission will tell you, they are brought together under the maritime strategy, or the marine strategy as a whole. But that's what they're there for. So having one which is regarded as the as part of the programs of measures for the other is eminently sensible. We've now got these discussions in Europe, as you know, this is where the CFP comes in, on whether we should ban trawling in MPA areas. And our government said they were going to do it. I don't know if they're going to go back in their words, but they said they were going to ban trawling in MPAs. There's also a philosophical debate that actually, if we had good environmental status everywhere, would we need MPAs? Because by having good environmental status everywhere, you've said the whole sea's in a good place, do we need MPAs? That's when we then get into the next discussion of, should we have not just MPAs, but highly protected MPAs? No, all of our countries have signed up to getting 30% of our areas protected by 2030 and 10% highly protected. And it's the highly protected marine areas, or strictly protected, I think the words are. In France, it's strongly protected. I think that's what we're aiming for. But no, I'm with you. But seeing one as a vehicle for getting the other one is quite important. And again, by bringing it back to what are we doing with the seas, what does the industry want, we're now talking about in the language that most governments are discussing, which is the economy. You know, Bill Clinton's comment, you know, what's the most important topic? It's the economy, stupid. And that's why we have to phrase our work in those terms. But it's not rocket science. Thanks, great question.
Thanks, Mike. Can we take one more?
Yeah, of course.
One more question and then we'll finish. So, Mark, please, last question.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Sorry.
Mark Dickey-Collis here, just sitting in front. You're looking right at
Hi,
me. It's good.
yeah, I've
Great.
seen. I've just realised if I do this, I can actually see faces. This is great.
So my question to you, and thanks for your talk. It covered a lot of areas, and you gave a lot of diagrams and lists there. But all but one of the ICES countries has signed up to the GBF, the Global Biodiversity Framework. You just mentioned that in your last answer. And there's a real sense of urgency because we have the targets by 2030 and the goals by 2050. And everybody has to do it, and we're expected to do it, and we failed at the ACHI targets, so we need to move. I didn't get that sense of urgency from your talk, I'm afraid. Where is that urgency? Do we need it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's nice to see you, Mark. We'll catch up on that. The problem is that I've been around a while. I've seen deadlines come and go. I like Richard Adams, the author. I like his comment that he said, I like deadlines. I like the whooshing sound they make as they go past. And we've seen so many. We had 20% by 2020, we've got 30% by 2030 and so on. And we've got these numbers that are almost created because it's something a politician can remember. It is critical. When I worked for the EPA in Scotland, almost the first week I went there, I was talking to a very good friend, no longer with us, Dave Mackay in Aberdeen. And Dave said, Mike, when it comes to environmental regulation, we don't use where there's a will, there's a way. We use where there's a will, there's a way out. So every time we create a regulation, then we have people trying to find their ways around it, sort of thing. It is urgent that we can get these, but I'm worried now that the economists are dominating things and the environment, even in the UK with a left of centre government, the economics, mostly because economy is in a state, is getting dominant over the environment. So yeah, my apologies, Mark, but it is urgent. And we've got ways of doing this, but I think, interestingly, we had a discussion the other day that the 30 by 30 plus 10 is still not universally agreed. Some people are using the 10 as being part of 30. Other countries are using the 10 as being additional to 30. So, yeah. Sorry, I wasn't ignoring it. It's just that there's only so much you can talk. But you're right. We've got the targets. I mentioned about doing the World Ocean Assessment. We're on the third cycle now, the UN one, which the World Ocean Assessment should have the same publicity or whatever as IPCC, but for some reason it doesn't. No, we're on the third cycle. The first one was like 2009 or whatever and that. But the problem we've had in writing it is every time we try and put in it some recommendations, it then has to be checked by all the, whatever it is, 190 UN countries. And every one of them is taking out anything that could be possibly, what they call a rod for their own back. So, yeah, we don't have the political will to do this at the moment. It is urgent. Let's say, I was just commenting on a report where I'm an advisor for a project where they're trying to look at public engagement in this. And I think what very often happens, if I was there telling you, and Mark has done the same thing, if I was telling you about the catastrophe, biodiversity crisis and climate change crisis, what I'm doing is I'm what we call preaching to the converted. You know all this. It's what we need to do is we need to go out and preach to the non-converted in all this. So we'll catch up. Okay.
Sorry, Mark never asks easy questions.
No,
So,
no.
Not surprised.
That's why people are here.
Thank you, Mike, for your keynote. Thanks for a very interesting presentation and answering to questions. Thanks to the audience for very lively interactive discussions.
Right.
We have something for you.
Ah, so much. Okay.
This is the historical history book of ICES.
Thanks. Wow. That's great. Many thanks. And as I mentioned, if you want any of the slides, then or the presentation, just call me. I always say if you're very welcome to use my slides. If you make any money by using them, I want some of it. But things there.